Hi, Julianne. Nice to see you again. Attending so many sessions of this conference. I think Lena is currently joining. I think we're going to get started. We'll be joined by Julia Nicio, who'll be coming in anytime. We are at the final day of the conference, so we're extremely grateful that you guys have taken time out of your schedules to join us. We have an all-star panel to talk about a very relevant subject in that how are we adapting to this new world we live in, and how does research continue? How does work continue? I'm assisted by, and actually I'm doing nothing. This entire session is possible because Maria and EnPAx 4 has done a great job with the technical side. And if you have any questions, please just message us. Julianne says she's getting some ice cream for dinner too, which is great. Tomorrow, February 5th is National Eat Ice Cream for Breakfast Day. So it's an excuse to eat ice cream. With that, I will turn it over to Kristin. Thank you all for joining and hope we have a great session.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristin Weis. I'm the chair of the Disaster and Resilience Interest Group in the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. So just some housekeeping things. Reminder, a compliance reminder that by registering and participating in this event, you agree to abide by the Environmental Peacebuilding Association's anti-discrimination, harassment, and retaliation policy. Harassment in every form is unacceptable. If you witness or are subjected to unacceptable behavior, or notice that someone else is being subjected to unacceptable behavior or have any other concerns, please immediately notify the email address conference@environmentalpeacebuilding.org. All other reports or all reports will be strictly confidential, and I'll add that information in the chat in just a minute. For Maria, if you're able to add that information in the chat. Then on. All right. So this session will begin with 2 case study presentations, followed by an inclusive roundtable discussion focused on finding solutions to current and future research and fieldwork challenges. Please feel free to ask questions and comment in the chat throughout the session. A little bit about our panelists. So first up, I want to acknowledge David and Maria for their outstanding technical support and helping make sure that this session and the entire conference is running very smoothly. The first presentation will be from Brock Bersaglio. He is at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Brock is a lecturer in environment and development. His research focuses on how natural resource management shapes and is shaped by human, non-human relationships in the context of biodiversity conservation, natural resource extraction, and sustainable development, focusing mainly on Kenya as well as Tanzania and Zambia. Next, we hope to have Julia Nicio. Julia studies peace operations and impacts of climate change on missions. She is currently earning a master's in international security and defense at the Brazilian National War College. She will be presenting on behalf of herself and her colleague, Mariana Coluccio. Mariana, who is unable to join the session, her work focuses on women, and she is currently earning a master's and PhD in military sciences at the School of Army Command and General Staff. I believe she is also a researcher for the UN Agenda for Women, Peace, and Security. Then we have our discussants. Lydia. Lydia Hirschman. She is at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Lydia is a policy and legal advisor and doctoral student at MIT. Her research focuses on planning for extreme weather events and explores how stakeholder engagement contributes to disaster preparedness. Part of her research also explores the implications of considering nature as a stakeholder for climate adaptation. So with that, Brock, if you would like to begin your presentation.
Sure, thank you very much for that. Just share my screen. Hopefully you should be seeing it. Can you see that all right? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thanks very much for those who are here and for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight in the UK. As was said, my name is Brock Bersalio, and I'm a lecturer in environmental development at the University of Birmingham. And the title of my presentation today is The Implications of COVID-19 for Environmental Peacebuilding, Insights from Northern Kenya. The work behind this presentation is very much a collaborative and larger team effort, and I'll get into that shortly. One of the goals of this talk is to present some of the early findings that are coming out of this research project, which highlight the importance of thinking about unintended and knock-on effects of the pandemic on environmental peacebuilding. But I'll also spend time unpacking the methods and methodologies behind the project, given the theme of this panel and what we'll be discussing. Right, so this presentation is kind of the output of two related projects. The first one is funded by the United States Institute of Peace, and it's a participatory action research project that seeks to support grassroots environmental peacebuilding in northern Kenya. The second project is kind of supplementing that, and it's funded by something called the COVID Collective here in the UK. And that project is looking specifically and directly at what COVID-19 has meant for peace and conflict in northern Kenya. So the project in this presentation is kind of born out of early observations and fears that heavy-handed lockdown measures could exacerbate conflict dynamics in already fragile places like northern Kenya. And all sorts of factors contribute to fragility in northern Kenya for those who might not be familiar, including high reliance on natural resources for pastoralist communities there, historical land disputes and injustices dating back to colonial times, new investments in land, and also some slightly more sort of harder or directly related conflict dynamics around intercommunal violence and growing activities of Al-Shabaab in parts of northern Kenya. So as you might expect, we had to get quite innovative with this project, which began just over a year ago. And this was because of COVID restrictions and all that came with that, but also just because of doing research efforts to try to do research in a safe and respectful way, not only due to the virus, but also peace and conflict dynamics in general. So the approach we ended up using involved hiring and training environmental fellows that were embedded in communities across northern Kenya. And we relied mostly on virtual methods like weekly diary entries and interviews. And these were all facilitated by an app that's called ViewWorld, as well as other digital tools like WhatsApp. These were not without limitations, and I'm definitely happy to chat more about those. But it did prove to be quite effective for us, I think. As you can see, within a year, and actually less than that, 906 diary entries were submitted by the fellows, and just shy of 150 interviews were also carried out. And the aim of these methods were to have fellows document conflict and peacebuilding activities in their communities on a weekly basis, drawing from observations and informal conversations that they were part of, and also to supplement these with insights from key informant interviews beyond these communities. As mentioned, there is a much larger team behind this project. I won't introduce each and every one of them, but they come from the Indigenous Movement for Peace Advancement and Conflict Transformation, which is based in Northern Kenya, United States International University in Nairobi, and also universities in the UK. And collectively, we kind of refer to ourselves as shared lands, which is why you'll see that logo on the screens. All right, so something that I really like about this project is that it did not just rely on environmental fellows to collect data. Rather, the fellows were actively involved in designing interview guides and feeding back into research practicalities and logistics. And crucially, they were also the first to carry out analysis of the data. And they did this by identifying and coding important and recurring themes in the data that they collected. And this data analysis was carried out during a 3-day workshop in which all the environmental fellows came together in Isiolo, in Northern Kenya, in order to do what's I think referred to as participatory theme elucidation. Oh, I might be messing that up, but basically a participatory analysis method. And this analysis is not only going to inform outputs like articles and reports, but feed directly into a training curriculum that we will be developing and piloting as well to support grassroots environmental peace building. So I'm happy to, as I said, chat a bit more about the methods and the methodology after the presentation. But with all that said now, I'll just kind of highlight some of the early findings that are coming out of the project and that are a result of these methods. And these are specific to the implications of COVID-19 for environmental peace building in the region. So to start, one of the most immediate and potentially lasting impacts of the pandemic has had to do with priorities and basically shifting priorities. And basically what I mean by this is that the priorities of donors and organizations supporting peace building, as well as some of the government institutions that are involved in it, have sort of changed rather quickly and dramatically. And one example that came up quite often through the data, although not to be unfair and singling them out, was World Vision, which before the pandemic was quite involved in funding peace meetings and coordinating activities, but has since had to withdraw in sort of both of those areas. And similarly, and possibly more significantly, peace building efforts of local county governments, ranging from peace rallies to inter-county peace dialogues and the development of peace strategies, were also halted during much of the pandemic. And the main concern here is not just the immediate effects of this and the kind of lost momentum it can have on activities, but also that these shifting priorities could be changed more permanently, with funds being directed to other activities and actors that may be related to the pandemic or may not be. In the midst of these changing priorities, the region was also hit hard economically. Much of northern Kenya relies on wildlife tourism as a source of jobs, income, and revenue, but as you might guess, tourism numbers dried up almost completely during the pandemic. And this meant that people lost their jobs. And at the same time, the cost of fuel and other necessities also was on the rise. And this sort of knock-on effect led to increased cases of what people involved in the study often referred to as petty crime. That's theft of livestock, not necessarily wholesale livestock rustling, but individual animals, theft of other property. And definitely, while not petty in the sort of literal sense, it also resulted in intercommunal violence and also a rise in domestic violence, or at least was associated with this. And it's kind of tempting possibly to dismiss the relationship between these and wider conflict dynamics, but it has had quite a profound effect on people's material well-being and also sort of psychological well-being, with many suggesting that this dynamic has fed into wider conflicts and also confounded people's or diminished people's interest and motivation for mobilizing for peace building activities through rallies and meetings and so on. And finally, and unsurprisingly, lockdown restrictions on social gatherings and geographic movement also had an effect on peace building efforts. And with these restrictions at various points in time, it's not been possible to hold important meetings, to bring different groups together for mediation and so on. Or again, for organizational and government actors to travel to sort of conflict hotspots. And as I indicated, this has fed into tensions and made spaces that were already fragile even more tenuous due to petty crime, lack of income, and an inability to make use of coping strategies that rely on mobility, which are essential to pastoralist communities in these contexts. All right, just before I wrap up, I won't say much about this, but it's really important to recognize the differentiated experiences that exist when it comes to the implications of COVID-19 on peace and conflict. And in some areas in northern Kenya, especially close to towns and cities, increased police presence, enforcing curfews and social distancing, basically shut down everything, for months on end at times. But in other more remote communities, and here I'm thinking specifically of a Samburu community close to Samburu National Reserve, people actually said they're quite desperate for greater security and invited the government to bring their curfew restrictions and police to enforce these restrictions to their areas in the hope that it would put an end to conflict that was on the rise and growing more intense with neighboring Turkana communities. So dramatically different experiences based on geography and identity and ethnicity and so many other factors in terms of what these implications have been. And now just to wrap up, some of the key messages from this presentation and the project so far have been, one, I suppose the obvious one, that methodological innovation has been imperative. And while that's been great and actually addressed some of the other challenges that come with doing research in this context, it's also come with challenges as well. Second, that when we think about COVID and peace and conflict, restrictions and lockdowns and things like that certainly do matter. But in many ways, it seems like there's unexpected and knock-on effects that could be more significant to peace and conflict, which probably require closer scrutiny moving forward. And then just that final note as well, that we can't sort of have to avoid the trap of generalizing, even in the context of northern Kenya, about these implications, because from one context to the next, even if it's just an hour or two away, people's experiences vary greatly. So I'll stop sharing my screen and say thank you again very much and look forward to discussion.
Thank you, Frank, for that fascinating presentation. And now move on to Julio Muccio, who's presenting on behalf of herself. Julio?
Okay, can you listen to me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So I will share my screen. Right. Just, well, it's working, I guess so. Okay. I have just to put just 1 minute. If it's a problem if I just talk like this, it's okay for you because I can move here.
It looks
okay.
It's great. No problem at all.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be present at this event, and I thank you for the organization of the conference. As well, everyone present here today. Unfortunately, my work partner Mariana cannot be here today because she's doing her thesis, so I will present for her. Well, our research is titled Human Security Through Health Crisis, like lessons left of Ebola virus in the extraterritorials of peace operations. Well, let me just, I don't know, yeah, it's changing. So in this beginning, I would like to say that in the context of COVID-19 pandemic in which we find ourselves in 2020, health emergencies present specific challenges for unite peacekeeping operations and can contribute for health of host population by facilitating access of humanitarian aid agencies or providing day-to-day medical care. So, but they can also pose a threat to health of the host population and face health risk in challenging environments such as the 2010 in the case of Haiti cholera case and 2014 in West Africa Ebola epidemic. So in this way, our research, mine and Mariana, has the main objective to analyze how health emergencies can cause by caused by epidemic outbreak can directly impact peacekeeping operations structures. So in this case, we will analyze the impacts of related to Ebola in Congo. So this was like our main structures for the article, and I would like to tell the concept of human security was used for the first time only in the 90s in the report by the United Nations Development Program in the 1994. Based on this, we have right now the human security values, and among these definitions is health security. And when we're talking, when we're taking into account the potential of epidemic or pandemic outbreak, we can say that health can be classified as a security problem, given its potential destabilize states, societies, and regions. So we understand that health problem can destabilize a state or even entire regions due this dramatic impact on economic, social coexistence, state welfare and system, and trust in state institutions. So passing all this, I can also say that Ebola crisis in West Africa has unequivocally demonstrated its potential to cause immense disruption to social and state functions when experts underestimate the extent of the epidemic. But I can also say that that with the consolidation of multidimensional character of the new peacekeeping operations, especially in the 90s and after this, the new century, of the main health concern around the UNI peacekeeping has been the potential for peacekeepers to be vectors of disease, to spread the infection through the local community. However, this presence of peacekeepers in environments where these epidemics arise can also help to mobilize international actors as this crisis involves. So the Ebola epidemic in West Africa in 2014 was a wake-up call to intensify efforts to the fight against global epidemics. So distrust in the states, in the case of Ebola, also in the institutions of the Congo was determination factor to explain the size of the epidemic proportions in the case of this country. So as well,
I think we just lost Julia's connection.
Okay, well, we'll give it a second and see if she can join. While we're waiting, Brock, that you had 2 questions in the chat.
Yeah, both good questions, and I briefly replied to one about the fellows remaining involved in the project, which they will in some capacity for some time, at least, and over the next year. In terms of the question about compensation, I believe it was, yeah, compensation mechanisms. The answer to this.
Sorry.
Here we are. Okay.
This is a problem from Brazil.
No problem. You start wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just finished right now. So I was just saying right now that one of the UN peacekeeping operations to suffer from the impacts of Ebola was the United Nations mission in Liberia. So the current outbreak began in 2018, and in the 10th to have it's the 10th to have occurred in the country since the virus was discovered, and it's the second largest recorded globally. However, peacekeepers occupying the country contributed to mobilization assistance as the crisis escalated. So compared to the previous Ebola outbreaks, there are right now there have been a significant improvement in the institutionalization of data, allowing to the outbreak response to pay more attention to community feedback and needs, like in the case of MONUSCO, since this implementation reproduces the imagine of a traditional peace operation and security defense. However, there was like such attacks in the base of UN base in 2019, and the consequence of these attacks was the interruptions of response activities led by of the resurgence of case and likely delay of the response of several months. So just to finish, what I want to say is that diseases like such as Ebola and COVID-19, which have been threatening the world stage, and even diseases that should have already been eradicated, are reappearing in conflict areas, consequently causing changes in the nature of conflicts, and this complexity of the geopolitical landscape makes the Security Council mandate to maintain international peace and security increasingly challenging. As this results of this complexity and rush reality of the limited capacity of intensive care beds, the rates of transmissions, severity and mortality of fatal virus can occur in different proportions, as happened in Congo before, and other countries in Africa. So it's necessary for international community to know how to listen community and demands in response to a decision-making process, and truly invest in fragile health system for reasons to require stability and global health security. It's just this. I don't know if you could understand me, but I just tried. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Wonderful presentation. So now we're moving to the roundtable discussion, the bulk of this session. Now that we've heard these two case studies and are combined with our own experiences, we can move into a discussion that's broadly on research approaches and methodologies in light of the pandemic, including how to conduct fieldwork in the pandemic. How have people adapted to these new conditions? What methods have you used? Any challenges or benefits to these new conditions? And of course, any tips, advice, or resources that any of our panelists or participants would like to share I will also ask the questions in the chat, so feel free to participate if you'd like to join the conversation. And then I will also post a Google Jamboard that Lydia created, where we encourage you to share your own tips and advice and resources throughout the discussion. And with that, Lydia, over to you.
Thanks, Kristin. I am really looking forward to this discussion, and I think that even though I had some questions of my own after listening to you, there are already a couple of questions from the audience that Brooke had started responding briefly before Julia got back and connected, and I think it will be worth taking a few minutes to listen to those, since they are very relevant to what we're about to discuss. So if you wanna go ahead, Brooke, and answer to both David's and Lena's questions, and just for everyone to, if you cannot, to scroll up. David was asking whether Brooke has future plans to return to Northern Kenya, and also whether the fellows involved in the study are gonna be involved outside of the 3-day meetings. And then Lena was also wondering if there is in the participation action research part of the project, whether participants get any compensation, which is a very important and relevant question nowadays when thinking about part research.
Great. Okay, so as I kind of mentioned in the chat in response to David's question, the fellows will be involved still going forward. So we're finished the sort of research component of the project, which was year one, and now we're moving in a bit to implementation, which has to do with sort of designing that training curriculum and program that I mentioned, which involves workshops, sort of training workshops for civil society organizations and individuals in civil society. So the idea is that the fellows will be involved in facilitating those, to various extents. But then also that some of them may sort of stay on as kind of peace building and ambassadors, I guess you could say, after the project. Although the details of what that will look like are kind of TBD. But good question. And then the other question from Lena on compensation. Yes, super good, relevant question. One that is a little more complicated to answer than probably it should be, or you might expect. But the reason it's complicated is I guess, because the fellows were obviously sort of compensated, and they were the ones most involved in delivering the research through their sort of everyday activities, but also through interviews and things like that. But they were also embedded in communities and organizations, as I mentioned, in those communities that each have their own kind of policies around compensating individuals within those, within communities. And sometimes that can look like, as I'm sure you might imagine, providing as simple as providing refreshments to, for some events, to actual, financial compensation for some other events. So because it took place over such a long period of time, and there were so many sort of organizations represented, and because a lot of the activities were just everyday interactions, compensation, kind of like the findings, was very differentiated and just kind of varied from one context at one community to the next. So I think that's one of the challenges, certainly, of this approach, is how do you ensure consistency and fairness when so many organizations and actors and communities are involved. But it also certainly means that there was all sorts of forms of compensation at play at different spaces and times. I don't know if it answers it, but at least it's sort of more information about what.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I know it's always a tricky question, right? It's just that I always seek some advice for my own research, so that's why it's super interesting to hear about your perspective. Maybe 2 follow-up questions from that, if I can. So if I understand, that's something that you discussed beforehand with each of the organization you were working with, so there wasn't any constraint from the funders on this and on the compensation? Okay.
Yeah,
And
no fund from the funders. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's different. For example, in my case, it's a PhD project, and I know there are things that I'm not allowed to do. So this is also something that you have to negotiate. But I think it's good if it's decided with the participants themselves. And could you gather any feedback from all the participants on this and ensuring that, you know, those compensation mechanisms were in line with what they were expecting?
Yes. So, and that bit is one of the things that's still kind of unfolding now that that official research bit is done. So there'll be sort of the multiple, I guess, levels of kind of, I guess, almost like monitoring and evaluating of that kind of thing. 1 among the fellows themselves, and 2 among the organizations, and then 3, there will be, although not fully objective or completely removed from sort of the team, there will be individuals going around in the absence of the fellows and the organizations they represent, sort of getting feedback from the communities as well. So, but that bit's ongoing and sort of part of the next stage of the process.
Thank you very much.
Before I continue the discussion, are there any other questions? Because I think that the most interesting thing to do is that we take advantage of all the things that the speakers can tell us about their project. So by any means, if there are any other questions right now, let's go for those before. Okay, well, so while people are still gathering thoughts, and Brock, since you were talking about some of the challenges that you had in particular, thinking about PAR, thinking about compensation, I can think of even more like complex dilemmas, such as, you know, whether you even should be covering things like childcare or like transportation, or where is the limit that you need to put. In general, are there any other challenges that you either experienced during the research process that you had in the past and you could predict, or others that you discovered during this research process because of COVID or because of other reasons, either during data collection or when you were trying to get your findings?
Yeah, and there's, I guess, just in response, I'll point to 2, and one is a very everyday sort of micro example, and one's a bit more of a bigger issue potentially. But one had to do one sort of, so it's an iterative process, sort of, as I tried to get across. So the fellows are always sort of feeding back to us about practicalities and logistics of you know, of how the research was going and things to adapt on the fly, so to speak. And one thing that came up later on after the project had already sort of taken off is that so most of the fellows were recent university graduates completing BAs. Most had gone to Nairobi to do that, a few hours away or more. And so we're not, although the communities that they were in maybe have known the organizations they were representing, they were not necessarily somewhere, but they were not already sort of known to those communities. And so there was a real trust issue that, you know, as with any research, had to sort of be addressed. And one of the things that was fed back to us is that very sort of small things like business cards, you know, with a logo and their names on it, although it doesn't build trust necessarily immediately, it gives a kind of legitimacy and suggests in somewhat of a tangible way that this person isn't like, I don't know, like a spy from another, you know, group or organization, that there's some sort of something more objective and legitimate happening here. So I think, you know, that's one lesson that we've learned for the future is doing a little bit less of sending fellows out on their own, although they were given quite a bit of training, but maybe to think through more some of how they were perceived and how their own identity, including, you know, how their identity may be perceived accurately or not by other communities, could factor into the equation and could impact, you know, trust and things like that. And then there was also the big issue of safety. as sort of mentioned, conflict during the pandemic really did escalate, and all forms of conflict, not just sort of violent conflict, with guns between, herders and things like that, but domestic violence. So there was a constant messaging and feedback needed around people's safety, and if they felt safe, and sort of giving and creating space for them where they could say to someone not like me, who might be seen as, the leader, even though I'm quite, removed from it, to say, I don't feel safe, or this isn't safe, or like, we need to get out of here, and that kind of thing. So, and I think we'd prepped people for that and had those conversations going in, but we didn't necessarily know how some areas, would actually experience more conflict than is expected. So those were two sort of major challenges that came with this kind of decentralized approach to research. Whereas if it was more extractive in nature, potentially you might not have the same type of challenges over such a long period of time.
Thank you so much, Brooke. And I actually want to also give the floor to Julia if she has anything to add, but I want to expand the question both for Julia and for Brooke if he wants to add anything later. I am curious as to whether for some of these challenges, I can imagine that doing research in topics related to Ebola and also peacekeeping that sometimes is not so transparent outside of the UN, and also conducting research with the type of challenges that, for instance, Brooke was discussing, where there is an atmosphere of increasing petty crime or increasing violence. Sometimes you might have to get creative and to react to these challenges. So I would be also curious to hear not only the challenges, but also some of the creative steps that maybe you found yourself taking. And I realized, sorry, that Julianne had a question. So after that, we'll definitely revisit that.
I can also put it in the chat.
Sorry, Juliana.
Go ahead, Julia.
Okay, I was just saying that I read the question, so I can talk a little bit after this. Juliana can talk right now. Thank you.
I'm putting it in the chat. It's more efficient.
Okay. So I read the question. So I was just saying that finding data turned out one of the biggest difficulties here in Brazil. I myself spent like the last of 2 years doing my master's degree, but I was being affected by this global health issue, COVID-19. So for my research, I development research related to climate impacts on the peacekeeping operations, and it's really hard for me because right now I don't have like all the data to do my research, and I have suffered with the collection of the information online, since considering that I'm studying about Ebola too, and data transfers may have been harmed considering the explosion and demands to deal with COVID. So I never know if my data it's okay to look, because we don't know how to say, I mean, how is the data right now about Ebola, because the explosion of COVID. So COVID right now, it's much more important, So my study campus was like affected too. So I can go to libraries and my campus. So my research is really affected by right now.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, I can only imagine how, in general, it's a topic that is probably usually hard to address anyway, but with COVID, it must have been really hard. Brooke, any thoughts?
I think not a whole lot more in terms of challenges beyond what's sort of been said. I think there's, and everyone's sort of raising some really good sort of ethical issues as well. And obviously one of the ones that comes with doing related to safety, research in the pandemic is traveling, for research. And that's not something that I really ended up doing, but even, internally within Kenya, if you have people coming from urban centers, in Nanyuki or Nairobi or Isiolo or wherever, and being quite mobile, then, there's ethical considerations there, and it requires a whole new level of research logistics that before the pandemic, we would never have even, most of the time, at least for the research that I've been involved in, wouldn't be a consideration. I'm sure in other disciplines and topics, personal protective equipment and things like that would be. But yeah, it just added a whole new range of ethical issues that needed to be considered, and logistical and practical ones. And then, keeping tabs on all that if you're not, always present or moving with research is really challenging as well. So obviously an important thing to say.
Thank you. Julian, do you want to go ahead and ask your question, and then we'll have Lena?
Sure. I mean, I also tried to somewhat summarize it in the chat. But basically, Brock, I was interested in the way in which those students or mostly graduates could get involved in the research, sort of on a more research side of it, if they were interested. Because I've met a lot of students and sort of research assistants in countries that I've worked with who very much also wanted to build their own profile as a researcher. And so it's always nice when you have possibilities to, work together on a conference paper or something like that. And how far was that an option?
Yeah, great question as well, and super important. And I mean, to the extent it's been an option so far is a bit limited, just because we're coming into that kind of stage of, the process now where they've sort of been involved in the analysis. The next step is focusing on those workshops, and then sort of more academic and other outputs to come from that. So I think there'll be a kind of an open door policy for those who want to continue to be hands-on in the, not only analysis, but writing up of the data. And for sure, authors, that they know that, if they contribute to that, then authorship, their authorship is on it. In fact, even just by doing the first round of analysis, which is will be integral to some of those outputs, then that's certainly a welcomed contribution in terms of authorship. For those who may be less interested in producing written outputs, which for a lot of students or those involved in the project may actually be less desirable and less important than some of the hands-on opportunities that may come through being involved in these workshops, networking events. One of the organizations which I mentioned, which is EnPAx for short, Indigenous Movement for Peace Advancement and Conflict Transformation, they'll be, I think, keeping a few of them on a semi-permanent basis. Obviously, there would be some sort of application process for that, so it's not something guaranteed to everyone. But there's those three kind of different levels of ongoing involvement and engagement, and also just ensuring that the door is open for when dissemination events happen and these training workshops happen, because just being present in these rooms and being able to network, while it's not a guarantee of anything, it's still also some sort of that networking is important in the context of civil society organizations and jobs and things like that in urban Kenya. But yeah, it's a really, really, really good question.
Anna, do you want to go next?
Yeah, it's a question for everyone. Actually, it's more to some reflections that I haven't. I want to know what you guys think. First of all, I'm thinking, couldn't we transform this challenge of not being able to travel in a benefit, in the sense that when you're doing research in the global south in context where the research capacity are not really developed, maybe it's an opportunity to actually build capacity on the ground. So, you know, it's the production of knowledge it's also decentralized. So, you know, I'm thinking, do you think it's gonna go back to normal in research world as well, or have we created a precedent and now we know it's possible, we know that we can work with local researchers, you know, and therefore it's just gonna stay like that, and maybe other universities can be partner but not lead project anymore, which I think would also be good. And the second one was about, I was thinking about setting the topic of the research, because, you know, like in pandemic times where, especially if you want to work with vulnerable communities, they already have so many challenges to deal with, you know, for them to want to take part in your research, it really has to be relevant for them, you know. So also how the pandemic led us to rethink our research topic maybe, and to prioritize things and about thinking more about research impact. So I also think that's maybe something positive that we could take out of this. But yeah, let me know what you think.
I will give the panelists the floor first and then open it to everyone to answer this interesting question.
Lily, would you like to speak first, or?
Brooke, you can talk and learn a lot today, so you can go first.
Okay.
You're on mute.
I thought I would just speak to myself for a moment here. Yeah, two more good points and questions. About the first one, I think, yeah, absolutely. And sort of this project was the first kind of, for me, and I think most, if not all of the team, this was the first attempt at really trying to do research fundamentally differently, because, you know, like you said, we didn't have an option. And also because in terms of, you know, we just couldn't travel. There were restrictions, you know, we needed to get innovative. And then also because this sort of shared lands group involves, you know, organizations on the ground who were responding to sort of needs that were, you know, arising in the midst of the pandemic. It meant that those needs were deemed as still demanding some kind of, you know, research, and especially something more participatory, which is why we went ahead with the project. But I think having gone through, you know, this, I mean, just to speak for myself and not the whole team, it definitely has all these questions that I treated as sometimes, not always, more philosophical in research, or things to get to once I, you know, got more secure in my own career, just became, you know, necessity. And so I don't think I would, and possible, I don't think I would, you know, go back to doing research necessarily in the way that I used to do research. I think so many lessons need to be learned, and there's going to be so many issues that come out of this that we need to like think critically about around, you know, ethics, positionality, and like there's going to be all those considerations are still going to be at play. Like it's not a blank slate, or we don't have to think about this anymore. They just take new forms, right? So, and I hope that should be a part of those critical sort of discussions in the coming years, and hopefully this project will offer some lessons. There was another question that you asked. What I was saying, creative.
No, I think you got both. It was about research locally led, and the second one was about setting the topic, but I think you answered both. I mean, maybe you want to add something else, but.
Well, I should say as well that I'm speaking from a really privileged position. And it's kind of unfair and unjust. And certainly this is something I would say to PhD students I have, or master's students, that, you know, it's sort of unreasonable to expect, you know, a single PhD project to adapt in all these crazy innovative ways and accommodate all these new ethical considerations and be like so quote unquote progressive on all these issues just because of financial and all of the forms of capacity that would be so different for an individual graduate student or a PhD student or whatever the case may be, rather than someone who's part of a larger network where funding is less of a concern and other constraints are less of a concern. So I think there's also conversations to be had about who should be pushing these agendas. And it's sad, but like so many things, at least on the academic side of research, it's often the more privileged and secure ones who are less at the forefront of advancing this type of change. And that falls on master's students and PhD students. And that's not necessarily fair at all. So, that needs to be thought about and needs to be considered in terms of what we demand, of and expect of earlier career researchers as well.
Well,
I just want to actually quickly add that I think that is especially important for participatory action research. I think that is impossible to build the trust that is needed with a community in the time that a PhD lasts in order to actually write also unless there is a project already existing within the university or some sort of structure already behind. Sorry, Julia, go ahead.
No, thank you. I was just saying that for me, it's a little hard to say because I never did like field work before because we in Brazil, here in Brazil, we have a lot of issues to get like money to do studies like that. So it's a little complicated for me, but I really don't know what will happen like in the next few years. So. But I'm curious about what will happen, and I thank you also for the presentation of Brooke because it helped me a lot.
If I could too, I'd like to kind of build off of Lena's question. Since she talked about how you researchers can't actually travel and conduct research on the ground. I was wondering the same thing for Julia, because I really liked your presentation about the changing, the ways that human security is looked at and how it's different year on year and after different crises. So when Lena was asking that question, I was kind of thinking back to your presentation about how is the UN Security Council meeting their mandate. How do they view human security today after Ebola and COVID? And since, like Brock and Lydia have already alluded to, since so much about our way of life has changed since the pandemic, does the UN also have a responsibility to basically to change the way that they see their own role? And are they meeting like kind of their mandate in that regard?
I think that they are doing this right now, but sincerely, I don't know because, like I said before, I'm the field right now studying climate change too. So, like what I'm seeing right now is that for I don't know, but around 2007 for now, United Nations and Security Council has impounded right now a lot of documents and reports to do something in the fields. I don't know if something like if it could talk about something like securitization or just some change in the fields for people with passing through a lot. So I'm going to do something like this or this, but we cannot talk about securitization where all the states could do something to change this, and specifically United Nations. So it's what I think right now, because I don't know specifically what United Nations is thinking about Ebola because of the COVID right now, but I think they are caring more and more in the last few years.
Awesome. How did you get interested in looking at human security? And just how did you take the path to go to sort of down this road? And if you do you have, like, after presenting this, do you have any recommendations like post Ebola for like how new structures should be put in place?
Well, since my graduation, I am studying about peacekeeping operations, and right now I always had a dream like to being working on the third sector. And I'm doing my research with my leader of my university. So he specifically studied about peacekeeping operations. So I think that he could help a little bit more. But this field is very, interesting, because we see right now that there are threats that is not like considered anymore like traditional threats. It's a new field. So for me, it is like a very interesting field to continue to study, because it's new and it affects like everyone and pass like through all the states. So we have to study more about this, because it's something that can show up like anytime and cause like a destruction, a big destruction in everybody's, because every country, because we are seeing that like in the case of Europe right now, it's suffering with climate change, not because we see like Ebola affecting countries from Africa, but there are like right now a lot of another threats that it's affecting everyone. So it's my field, and I like to study this right now.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, definitely. I think that it's a field that has to be even further explored, and maybe adding to David's question. One of the things that I think I've seen the UN stress more since the beginning of COVID is like this push for the Build Back Better approach, much more than in the past. I think that even for the peace building side of things, which I don't know if all of you have perceived as equally. Are there any other questions? I have a million questions, so I can keep asking, but I want for everyone to be able to ask the panelists. Okay, well, so I'll continue until you get bored or or you have more questions. So another thing that I was thinking about while you were both presenting is the fact that in general, in academia and in research work, one of the things that I think characterizes a researcher is the need to be resourceful. They need to not necessarily reinvent the wheel. Sometimes just know where to look. And so I was wondering whether during COVID, for this project or other projects, you had to either find or come up with resources or part of the literature or part of or other look into other projects that had insights for you. For instance, I'm thinking of things like humanitarian literature, which has already there's already kind of like this back of like decades of experience in conducting research in situations like the pandemic that we've lived. So whether some of those either methodologies or just in general the experience of other researchers help guide your research during this pandemic time. Or for instance, Julia, you were talking before about how MONUSCO had already like experience with Ebola that not necessarily UNMIL had. until later, and whether there was also some sort of cross-pollination or some learning process there that helped with part of the process and implementation. So I would like both to ask this question to the panelists, but also I feel like everyone here has lived in the pandemic for the last 2 years. So and you have probably done some sort of research or some sort of project that require research, and I will be really curious to hear about what were your resources, where did you look, what do you learn from others, etc.
Well, so I will talk. I was just thinking that, yeah, like you said, Lydia, UN and peacekeeping, specifically peacekeeping operations right now, have learning a lot of another experience that have passed before. So I think that in the way this is good, but like I said before, I don't know if an UN will change in this way only for like gerencial crisis, like if they are doing this just for equalize, just for I don't know, but stay people calm in those countries, or if it's really like a really big issue, So I don't know what will going to happen, but I think that they are now doing a great job, better than before, of course. So they are experiencing new things. So they are preparing yourselves for those things, like these new things. So I think that I don't know what will happen in the next years, but they are thinking in a new way with these new operations.
Thank you. Lena, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks. I was thinking in the context of my project because I started my PhD in March 2020. So you might remember this month. Was super fun. But yeah, so and then when you're stuck because you cannot have access to the people you're working with. So I'm working with indigenous communities in Peru. It's not, I mean, they don't have access to internet connection, and they also had other thing to do than talking to a PhD student, other struggles. So I think that a learning was how you can gain information through, I mean, the resources that are already published, but especially the organizations that are working with those communities already. So in my case, it was a conservation NGO who'd been working with them for more than 15 years. So it was really allowing me to gain some knowledge. I'm also thinking, especially in indigenous context, a lot of indigenous communities, they have representation organizations. And I think that more and more, it's actually better to go through this organization first, to respect the hierarchy in those communities. So getting in touch with them, they often have, they're very organized, they have a good capacity, they can reply to your request and then put you in touch with the people that would be interested to work with you. So kind of going through those gatekeepers, if they can be local, that's better, but then it depends the different options that you have. So I think it was a learning in my research.
Yes, definitely. That was actually something that I also thought about a lot in terms of what would it mean if my sample, for instance, has to be restricted to places where communication is enough, or like communication lines are enough that I can actually conduct interviews, etc. Because that kind of like skews your study to a certain type of population, right? Or so you have to find these other creative ways. Julian?
I saw that Brooke was about to say something earlier, considering you're the actual panelist, if you want to add something first.
No, that's fine. You go ahead.
Okay, in that case, also just sort of a quick reflection on my own research. And the caveat here is that I'm more in conflict areas. So from the beginning, I knew fieldwork might be tricky, and there were sort of additional plan Bs and Cs. The pandemic still very much sucked, and a lot of things had to change. But so I had spent a lot of time figuring out different resources to work with in case I couldn't go anyway. And one of the things I noticed indeed is that there are many organizations, especially in the humanitarian sector, that have a lot of information available if you know where to look. And so for me, one of the learnings and sort of takeaways from the last 2 years was also just that I decided for myself that part of my dissertation is going to be a reflection on, or just a list even of different resources that are available online, so that people can find them a lot quicker than me sort of just randomly stumbling across them. And the other thing is that there are some organizations that publish their data directly, like primary survey data in all kinds of different resource centers online. But there's also always more data available than is in the reports. So quite sometimes I would see like a figure in a report, just sort of cross-reference that with some of the information in the text and realize, hey, they should have this data with like a much higher resolution, whether it's temporary or spatial or something. But it's just not important enough for the overall messages of the report to put it in there. And then you can still just email them, and quite often they would go like, sure, we can share this with you. We have the data. We would like it to be used. Sort of worst case, maybe you have a call with them first, so they can be sure that you won't do some kind of weird things with the data. But then at the same time, you also already have some sort of connection into the organization if you need something later on. And so I think just looking for these kind of resources can also be similar to what Lena said, sort of getting in touch with the right gatekeeping organizations. It can be a pretty good way to network at the beginning of the research.
Definitely. And if you want to share all your knowledge in the Jamboard for everyone, I feel like everyone will be super grateful.
Right now, it's a very, very informal short list of links that at some point I figured I need to start. Otherwise, it's just a massive bookmark folder in my browser.
We'll keep the Jamboard for the future.
I will copy some things over.
Brooke, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
Yeah, I mean, I could reflect a bit on that. I think all the points made have been really, really good and useful as well. I think in the chat, Kristin mentioned that this is new, but also not new, and I think there's that's so important to remember, especially as we all never mind experience all the professional challenges and academic challenges that this pandemic has presented to us, but all the personal ones and psychological ones and emotional ones. It's easy, especially during a PhD, to lose sight of, to feel alienated and kind of lose motivation or lose sight of that the fact that research does still matter, but also, which is what I was going to say, that a lot of things have been done before, and not in a bad way, and not in a way that you would exactly go out and do them. But for example, with that workshop in ACLO, it was a colleague of mine who just sort of randomly started searching academic articles and found this participatory theme elicitation thing, and it's not something either of us had ever heard of before or ever thought we would use, but someone did it somewhere in some context. So we were able to, adapt that method. And so I think it's often, in academia as well, so much pressure is put on us to do something new and innovative and novel and all these things, but there's something to be said with returning and critically engaging and building on things that have been done in the past in light of current circumstances. So I think that's probably worth, remembering as well. And it's certainly something that I have done and will be doing moving forward. There's something else I was going to say, but I can't remember, so it couldn't have been that important.
Thanks. And I see already Julian has shared all these links. Thank you so much.
I do remember what I was going to say. Sorry.
Great.
Sorry. Yeah. It's that, you know, I think for me, and this could be a disciplinary thing, but there is a real risk in it from this pandemic that big data, big picture quantified sort of studies could really become the norm, whether it's geospatial data or other forms of big data, and whether it's funding for, you know, social contextualized research, humanities, or just the impetus that funders of the world sees on those types of studies. I feel like it's so important for us to be having these types of conversations like we're having, because context matters so much. We need these types of in-depth, nuanced understandings of how pandemics or whatever play out in local context, and a future where, you know, satellites and drones and artificial intelligence are doing that research for us is a bleak and a scary one. So I think, you know, finding ways to be innovative, even if in a PhD, you know, instead of, if you wanted to do 100 interviews, doing some sort of like critical self-reflexive, you know, method or whatever the case may be, you know, qualitative, contextualized data and information is going to be so important and an important part of the struggle for knowledge and whose knowledge counts in the years to come. So I guess just to say, keep on with what you're doing and keep, you know, thinking and having these conversations.
Definitely so much food for thought, I feel, in general. And I see a lot of nodding. So everyone is like, yeah, that's true. That's right. Like, so I'm also glad that, you know, we all feel kind of like understood and that, you know, everyone is kind of facing these struggles. I don't know if people have questions. Otherwise, maybe I would ask one last question if Kristin is taking care of the time. So, so another thing that I was thinking about while you both were presenting is the fact that some of the topics that we have been discussing throughout the conference in environmental peace building, you know, topics like studying a conflict or conflict settings, but also an epidemic like it was Ebola or like a health emergency, right? Sometimes are such volatile situations that your research setting changes dramatically in a short period of time. And that requires a very fast response, sometimes in terms of maybe needing extra resources financially for something that you didn't expect. Or for instance, you know, Brock was talking before about ethics. And so sometimes when we have to conduct human subject research, you need to pass all these checks and all these things in order to ensure that the research is not going to have any negative impact. What are some of the things that you've seen or that you think that you can kind of anticipate when you are starting a research in kind of these settings that are volatile, to kind of prepare for the eventuality of some change in the course or in the context of the research to happen? And maybe it's too complicated of a question, and I see a lot of puzzled looks. So, so for instance, I remember in one of my projects where only thanks to the fact that we set aside some additional funding, we could hire extra people in one of the villages where we didn't expect, you know, that would be needed. You know, things like that maybe you don't think about initially, or for instance, expanding your network, making other universities participate in your study, and having like a stronger network that can you know, be of help later, but also to whom you can help in answering this research question. if the situation changes and either you cannot be there in person, or either you see once you get there that actually that question is better approached by having conversations through the local organizations like other participants have been talking about, etc. I don't know if there are any thoughts about all that.
I think in kind of going forward with the question, you put forward some really good answers as well, which is identifying multiple, I mean, in terms of what challenges you can anticipate, it is almost hard to even think about, doing that effectively, given everything the last year or two has thrown at people in that research. So we can definitely learn so much from all the unforeseen and unexpected things that came up, in the last year or two, and then just kind of map those on to future, projects. And like you said, instead of going through, one gatekeeper, maybe identifying multiple, if funding allows, setting aside pools of funds that are flexible and can be used for, I don't know, maybe actual field work, or maybe some kind of dissemination, or producing some kind of innovative output or something like that, that can be used for salaries, including training, paying for training that people might need, so that they're, not just sort of being instructed to go do things, but also getting training through the process. All those things, which, and you said most of them, I think are really good starting points, at least for looking at the future.
Julian, more ideas or a question?
Ideas, reflections, former frustrations, current frustrations. Now, one of the things that we ran into that I would have never considered beforehand was that normally if I would do my own field work, I would just come back and get my costs reimbursed from university, and it wasn't much of an issue. But then all of a sudden I couldn't do my field work, and instead we were working with a local civil society organization that was providing a lot of support with regards to Zoom interviews, to make sure that the interviews had proper internet connections, that they were at the right place at the right time, providing translation and all those kind of things. Because I wasn't there, I wasn't the one giving them the money, and instead university would have had to pay them. But that was a transfer that would have gone to a country where the university has different administrative rules in terms of we can't just transfer money to like Middle Eastern country XY. And all of a sudden it was like a half-year administrative process that ended with all kinds of sort of trying to work around different bureaucratic issues that we would have never had if we had just been there in person. And I think it's always good to just triple check what kind of rules you have to work with within your own institutions to be prepared for something like that, and maybe also just communicate with the responsible people beforehand to say, hey, this might be an issue that will come up.
Definitely, I feel like besides resourcefulness, the other thing that researchers really need is patience with admin stuff and creativity, definitely.
And we have 4 minutes left in this session, and so I just wanted to give Julia and Brock and Lydia any last final thoughts or comments before we conclude.
I'll go first. I just want to thank the.
No.
Oh, sorry.
It's gonna happen.
Go ahead, Brock. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you for all of you coming. I don't think I have anything more to add, but yeah, it's been a pleasure to engage with you and learn about some of your work as well. So yeah, quick thank you, and for putting the panel together.
I also would like to thank you. This is my first conference, international conference, so I appreciate the patience. So welcome when you want to go to Brazil. So it's a nice country too. So thank you so much for this. And I just would like to tell that what I'm doing now is to get in touch with people working in the field so they can also help me to my research. It's a good thing to do right now because we can go to the field. So thank you so much.
Julia, be careful with what you offer because I would love to visit Brazil. Thank you so much to all the panelists. It was a real pleasure, and also to thanks everyone for the participation. I think that it has really enriched the conversation, and there's a lot of notes that I'm gonna keep from this session that I hope that also other people enjoy when this is uploaded to YouTube. I think there's a lot of very good insights that will last for whatever is left of the pandemic and whatever comes next.
Thank you for Lydia for leading a wonderful discussion, and Brock and Julia for such very impactful insights, and for all the participants, for all the discussion that you really brought momentum and kind of the issues that I think we're all grappling with. Just as a note, the Disasters and Resilience Interest Group, all are welcome to join through the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. We'll be continuing this conversation over the coming weeks. We meet, we kind of have multiple opportunities to engage with each other and have a bit of a community in this area of interest. So thank you all for coming, and unless David or Maria have any other last thoughts, I think this is the last session of the conference, and I hope you all had a lovely time.
Thank you guys.
Thanks
Nice
a
to
lot,
meet you.
everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye.